Hey there, welcome to Do Stuff Outdoors. Today, tomorrow, and the next day, we're going to be hiking through Jefferson National Forest, Lewis Fork Wilderness, and just a corner of Grayson Highlands. Ready? Let's go. As you can see from the sign behind me here, we're about to enter the Lewis Fork Wilderness, which is still contained within Jefferson National Forest. It's maybe the edges might be a little bit questionable on that, but generally speaking. And there aren't any concrete records that confirm this, but it's possible that back in the day, native peoples made seasonal use of this land, such as the Cherokee or the Tutelo or the Monacan. Now in the 18th and 19th centuries, as European settlers started to arrive, they introduced selective logging. Over the course of time, that selective logging, chestnut blight, excessive grazing, those activities started to take their toll on the land, which eventually prompted federal protection. And in 1984, this region was designated wilderness by the Virginia Wilderness Act. I don't know if we will, but it's possible we may see signs of homesteading as we are out here for the next 3 days. You know, some of the features that we're walking through right now are these lower elevation hardwood forests, cove forests. As we get higher, we'll start to see trees that are more common to northern regions. I don't think I'd mentioned it when we got started, but we're on the Mount Rogers Trail right now. And after a bit, this is going to parallel, I think it's called the Virginia Highlands Bridle Trail. But then shortly after that, we're going to meet up with the Appalachian Trail. This higher elevation is more like climate you might find in northern regions. And so the ferns and the mosses, as well as the spruces and the firs, are able to grow and to even thrive in this region. It's one of only a handful that are remaining in the southeastern United States, in contrast to the lower hardwoods that we saw coming up the Mount Rogers Trail. So we're at the junction between the Mount Rogers Trail and the Appalachian Trail, as you can hopefully see in the sign beside me here. Of course, the mileage seems to have been scraped off. I am diverging from the AT for just a bit on this little connector here that'll join up with the, I believe it's called the Virginia Highlands Bridle Trail. But coming out here, we do get a pretty great view of some of these highlands up here. And of course, one of my favorite signs, it's kind of faded, more so than the last time I was out here, but it says National Forest Wilderness, closed to motor vehicles, motorized equipment, hang gliders, and bicycles. So I just wonder how big of a problem were hang gliders out here. Anyway, I left my hang glider and I don't have a hang. Some of these fence posts that we're walking past, and there's barbed wire still connected between some of them, are possibly holdovers from the days of homesteading back in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Off the AT on this bridle trail, we get a chance to get some of these views looking down into the valleys and over across into North Carolina at Grandfather Mountain region and well, at least Grandfather Mountain. I can't remember what other sources or what other sites there are. All right, so we've come up the AT toward the spur to the summit of Mount Rogers. Now, given the time of day, we're probably going to try to hit that in the morning. We'll have to backtrack a little bit and then go up, come back down. But for now, we're just going to head on toward the Thomas Knob Shelter area, make camp, go from there.
Good morning. I didn't have much of a closing for yesterday. We just kind of got to camp. Got up early this morning to go back toward Mount Rogers, well, past the Thomas Knob Shelter. But as we got up, we had to look to the left. Actually, this is where we'll be headed later today. And just the sunrise, the cloud inversions, just a beautiful sight. So we had to take a minute to come back and check that out. Behind me, you can see the Thomas Knob Shelter. And this shelter was named for Thomas Knob, which in turn was named for the Mount Rogers Appalachian Trail Club first president and co-founder David Thomas and his wife Noreen. And I can't remember the year it was built. It's not terribly old. I'll put a note about the date down below. So we're back on the Mount Rogers Spur Trail. It's about a half a mile total, well, up, and then another half a mile back down. We're just trying to bang this out, just Brian and I. But Mount Rogers is Virginia's highest peak. It is 5,729 feet in elevation and is completely treed in at the summit. So we'll get to see some trees and rocks up there. And Mount Rogers is situated, well, within the Jefferson National Forest, and that was designated in the 1930s. I can't remember if it was a specific 1933 or 34, somewhere in there, but the mid-30s, I believe. And then Mount Rogers itself, well, I'm sorry, not Mount Rogers, but the Mount Rogers recreation area was designated in 1966. Obviously, the mountain had its name before then, and it gets its name from William Barton Rogers, who was Virginia's first state geologist. He conducted surveys of the surrounding environment, but he later went on to found MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Yesterday, as we were coming up, reaching those higher elevations, I had mentioned the forest ecology changing from the lower elevation hardwoods and cove forests to typically colder environments, and it gives you a feeling more like what you might see in New England as opposed to the majority of the Carolinas. Here we are at the summit of Mount Rogers. As you can see, kind of walking around, it is rocks and roots and trees and not much else. So, I mean, you come up and you realize there's no more up, so you're at the top, but there aren't any compelling views of the surrounding environment to be had from up here. But it is nice to be able to come up and just say, yep, I did it. I've been to the highest point in Virginia, so that when people ask you at parties, they probably won't. I wouldn't.
over my shoulder behind me, I think that's Pine Mountain. If it's not, it might be Wilburn Ridge, and I'll put a note stating which one it is. This is a nice reward. You know, you're working your way down this slope. You do have some up on the way. Anyway, I just wanted to give y'all a glimpse of what it looks like from the AT as you're working your way northbound. Here's yet another perspective of Pine Mountain. We've come around from the other side. All right, we are off the AT for just a bit, taking this short spur up to Pine Mountain. And there are some, there's some pony evidence, I'll say, I gotta watch out for. There's a big old crusty pile of pony evidence. I'll just walk around that. But as we get up here, get up onto some of these rocks, it will be worth it. Just got to kind of pick my way through some of these social trails to find a more navigable path. There we go. Yeah, I'll go over here. Yeah, this is some of the payoff for making your way up to the top of Pine Mountain here. Pine Mountain, lower than Mount Rogers by a couple hundred feet. Pine Mountain is 5,525 feet, I believe. Yeah, 5,525, that sounds right. Part of the reason that the ground up here is less forested than other places is because of the past grazing use that I had mentioned yesterday. I don't know how well it shows up in frame like this, but there's a cow kind of in the center third here. I thought we heard a moo earlier, and apparently we did. And so this looks like a pretty young one, just kind of taking a break in the afternoon. Can't blame them. It's a beautiful day. And I don't want to get too much closer because I just don't want to annoy him. A couple of us peeled off the AT just to climb a little bit of the Wilburn Ridge Trail, just enough to get up there and get some of the views there. Similar to what we saw from Pine Mountain, so the other guys aren't really missing much. But it's here, and I just felt compelled to give it a shot. It is a bit more of a climb than Pine Mountain, to give you a sense of what we're up against here. Fortunately, it's not straight, free climbing up that or anything like that. But and you can see why packs are off, because at least this portion of the trail, once you get past the open section up at the top here, the trail is not quite as overgrown. But between the AT and the exposed portions, it gets grabby. So I'm huffing and puffing, but we're up here. It's a quick little jaunt up the best part of Wilburn Ridge, as far as I'm concerned. And honestly, the entirety of the Wilburn Ridge Trail is one of the highest trail accessible ridge lines in all of Virginia. And as you can see across the way, it parallels Pine Mountain, but it actually gets its name from a tough old cattleman named Johnny Wilburn. You know, he was familiar with this land. He grazed livestock in this region. And some of these balds, I don't know how well they're picking up, but they're low bush blueberry. Maybe there might be some hawthorn, and as you might have seen as we came up through, there's rhododendron. I mentioned Pine Mountain sits at about 5,525 feet. Wilburn Ridge within the range of 5,400 to 5,500 feet elevation. We are on the AT, still working our way around Wilburn Ridge, but we just came to a nice clear spot in the trail here that gives us yet another look down into the valleys, and especially with the colors starting to turn, just makes it that much more beautiful. So we've just crossed into Grayson Highlands State Park off of the Lewis Fork Wilderness. We'll only be in the Grayson Highlands for a little bit, just kind of the top corner of it, so to speak. And then we'll cut back into either the Jefferson National Forest or Lewis Fork, or maybe even Little Wilson Creek Wilderness. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll have to double check it. Certainly can see why it's busy today. It is a great day for it, and great views. Thankful for the opportunity to be out here. We've stopped for lunch, and we're up on a series of rocks, and behind me, down below, you can see what's called Massie Gap, and that gets its name from the Massie family who homesteaded here up until the 1950s and 1960s. And this gap is sort of like an accessible or navigable spot between Wilburn Ridge to the west and Hog Orchard Mountain to the east. And it's also kind of a launching point for people headed toward Mount Rogers or Wilburn Ridge or other points north of here. We are about to start filtering out of the Quebec Branch. You know, I was wondering, why is it called the Quebec Branch? Pretty sure we're quite a ways from Canada. While there aren't any definitive explanations, you know, whether it's in honor of French and Indian War veterans, or even Revolutionary War veterans. Oh, hey, thank you. Or even maybe just, you know, somebody down here at the right time thought, hey, this kind of reminds me of Canada for whatever reason. Either way, I'm thankful that it's here and that we're able to fill our water bottles with it.
I love beans.
It started raining, as you might be able to tell, but we did finally come across some of the Wilburn Ridge feral ponies. Yeah, these guys were introduced to this region, well, not these specific ponies probably, but the Wilburn Ridge ponies were introduced to this region in the 1970s as a measure to help maintain the balds, to keep them from reverting back to forest. And as you can see, they do a great job of just chowing down shrubs before they can take off. Now, even though it's raining, you know, that may be making you wonder, like it did me, you know, what do these guys do in the winter? Well, it turns out that they are pretty well adapted to colder temperatures. They grow thicker coats. They have a knack for finding forage even beneath snow. And so they manage just fine. And the Wilburn Ridge Pony Association does kind of keep an eye on the herd, but generally speaking, they manage on their own. I will point out, you were not supposed to walk up to the ponies and mess with them. In fact, if you search YouTube, you may find videos of the ponies, let's just say, defending their territory. So if they approach you, that's generally okay, but you know, just let them do their thing and appreciate them from a distance. We are still on the AT, and we've just come to the outskirts of the Wise shelter. As you can see from the sign behind me, there is no tent camping allowed, but as we go forward into into this region, we'll see the structure that is the Wise Shelter. It's likely named for an early local family, but there are other thoughts about where that name might have come from. This is the aforementioned Wise Shelter. It was likely built in the 70s, or the early 80s, somewhere between the late 70s and early 80s. We are still technically within Grayson Highlands. This shelter is maintained and updated by the Mount Rogers Appalachian Trail Club, or the MRATC. Anyway, we are leaving the Wise Shelter, heading down the AT. Those gates prevent the ponies from getting into places that they are not supposed to be. And probably works on some people too. This is Big Wilson Creek. It flows down off of the northeastern slopes of Mount Rogers and feeds into the New River system. It was likely the water source for the early homesteading families in the area, maybe the Wilburns or the Massies, maybe others. Here's where we leave the AT and pick up on the Wilson Creek Trail. Wilson Creek is a major tributary to Big Wilson Creek. They likely share the same namesake, which is most likely from a young surveyor in 1749 who was surveying the border between Virginia and North Carolina when he fell in and he drowned. And so there's a community about 15 miles southeast from here called Mouth of Wilson. So that is likely the Wilson. All right, we've come off the Wilson Creek Trail and joined up with the Virginia Highlands Bridle Trail. And as you might have noticed along the way, these routes are much wider than the typical hiking trails, certainly wider than the AT and most of the portions we've come up through the last couple of days. So we just did pretty much, I think, a quarter mile all uphill. So we got maybe 3/4 of a mile until we hit the scales. We have come off the Virginia Highlands Bridle Trail. We're now at the scales. And that sits roughly about 4,300 feet, give or take. It is just outside the Lewis Fork Wilderness and also just outside the Jefferson National Forest. Back in the day, herders would bring their livestock here and weigh them before market. In fact, there were mechanical scales set up on site that were established in the late 1800s, early 1900s for that purpose, weighing livestock. And when they would have auctions, you'd sometimes see buyers as far away as eastern Tennessee. I don't think that there are many surviving such structures, but back in the day, there were seasonal use structures, whether for herders to live in over the course of the season, or dry laid corrals for their livestock. As transportation improved, especially livestock transportation, as roads themselves improved. By 1984, the scales had gone from more of a working landscape to something of a backcountry relic, given those changes in transportation. And we are leaving the scales now. Get through this gate here, and then we'll take the Crest Trail for about a mile before we join back up with the AT. This gate's, well, it's squeaky, and the bolt is a little bent. Going the Crest Trail, happened across a couple of feral ponies still. Hopefully they're in the frame behind me. But I thought this was a good time to point out that this Crest Trail, like a lot of the trails that kind of treat the scales as a hub, was used by cattlemen back in the days when they did have those cattle auctions up at the scales. And even before then, before a lot of the established trails throughout this region were established, including the AT, this trail, well, this portion of the Crest Trail that we're taking, formed part of a natural travel spine that just kind of lent itself to being traversed to get from, point to point through this region. By the 1990s, most of the grazing licenses had come to an end. That being said, they use a combination of brush clearing, burning, and, as you can see behind me, the feral ponies to maintain the balds in this region around the scales. I wasn't sure if we were going to see any ponies this trip, so I'm grateful. We are back on the AT off of the Crest Trail, and based on the signage we saw a little ways back, we've got just under 2 miles before we make it to the old orchard shelter. That's where we're gonna pitch camp for the night. Hopefully there will be some daylight left, so we'll see how it shakes out, but like I said, it's just a little less than 2 miles. We are at Old Orchard Shelter. Tired. This region most likely gets its name from an old homesteading orchard. One other interesting feature at this location, we're about 4,100 feet, is that it's in a bit of a transition between the spruce fir at higher elevations and then the hardwoods at the lower elevations. It does look like be a little bit before the other guys get here. Anyway, most likely, see you guys tomorrow. Good morning. It is the third day we've been out here, and we're just breaking camp, getting ready to get back on the trail. So a little bit of the view of the campsite we were able to find here at Old Orchard Shelter. It's down from the shelter a bit, but the ground's reasonably flat in places anyway. It's grassy, it's pretty open. There are rocks, but they're easy enough to avoid. All right, last little bit of the AT for us today, and then we'll hit 603 and ultimately a Fairwood Valley Trail. I think it's Fairwood Valley Trail. It's Fairwood something trail. Anyway. So we're crossing 603 right now. You're leaving the AT and picking up the Fairwood Valley Trail. Which parallels 603 for the part of it that we'll be on anyway. And it sits right around 3,100 feet in elevation. So from the highest point where we were, which is around 57, to down here, 2,600 foot drop overall. And it's likely that this particular trail might be the modern incarnation of old drover routes as herders and cattlemen moved their animals through this region, possibly up toward the scales. In the 1900s, this region was selectively logged for hardwoods, mostly chestnut, would have been before the blight most likely. Also oak and poplar as well. We're still on the Fairwood Valley Trail, just walking through the meadow here, and there are at least 4 cows just really interested in our passing. Just gonna keep moving. Right here, crossing the Fairwood Valley Trail, is Fox Creek, which was likely named for a local family or possibly a traveler. But it's worth noting that Fox is a common surname in eastern Tennessee and western Virginia. We are just winding down the last little bit of the Fairwood Valley Trail. Not too terribly far from the parking lot. But throughout this trip, we've gotten to see some rare forest types. Well, rare for the southeast, maybe more common in the north. We've also gotten to see some centuries-old grazing balds, and fortunately, we got to see some of the feral ponies that help maintain those balds to this day. We got to the summit of Mount Rogers, maybe visually unimpressive, but it's the highest point in the state of Virginia. And we did get to see some visually impressive views from Pine Mountain, from Wilburn Ridge, and even from the rocks just above Massie Gap. So all in all, you know, been a great 3 days. And of course, there's always more to explore, but that's gonna wrap things up for this time. So anyway, I appreciate you coming along with us, and I look forward to seeing you next time.